Veto session, special ed case law, and principal for a day, all coming up in this IPA Talk. Hi, I'm Jason Leahy, Executive Director of the Illinois Principals Association. Welcome to this IPA Talk. I guess we can look at this as the legal legislative edition as we look to wrap up veto session and a few other things. With me today, I've got Alison MALEY, our Government Public Relations Director, as well as Brian SCHWARTZ. Thanks for wearing the plaid shirt today, by the way.
Yeah, we kind of matched.
No kidding, not by choice, but Brian, our Deputy Director and General Counsel. So, Alison, let's start with you. We just wrapped up veto session here. A few things going on with that. So, would you mind just giving us an update and telling us what happened?
Yeah, probably the biggest thing I think for school districts anyway is the property tax freeze. So there's still opportunity for that bill to then make its way over to the Senate when they come back in the January and the spring session. But basically, there's a new property tax freeze bill.
That passed the House.
That did pass the House, yeah. It includes a homestead exemption now for longtime occupants. It increases the senior homestead exemptions as well as the general homestead exemptions for folks that are taking advantage of that now. And then make some sort of changes to PTEL districts and then even taxing districts that are not in PTEL, basically zeroing out your ability to levy for the following 2 years. So obviously a big impact on school districts. We were very concerned about it. So I think there's still time to reach out to your senators and just kind of explain what that impact might be for your school district.
Well, the concern is that basically we feel like with the new evidence-based funding bill and the additional dollars that were put into that, very helpful to districts, but this could not only negate that, but may even be worse than what we picked up with the evidence-based funding. Yep. So something we really need to be paying attention to. Definitely. What else?
Sure. So in terms of overrides, there were really two major overrides related to school legislation. So the first is cursive writing. So we've talked about it before, but really it's a little bit more limiting than how the bill was drafted initially, which was saying that you had to have I believe a unit of cursive writing every grade level K through 12. So it's much more limited now. There's 1 unit of cursive writing required for elementary school districts, and kids have to complete that before they reach the 5th grade. So as long as you get it done somewhere in between that time, that satisfies the mandate. Probably the other one too would be a substitute fee. So it refunds the sub fee if someone has proven that or can prove that they've subbed within 10 days within the last year of their sub license. So that hopefully that might, I don't know how much, but hopefully might kind of open up the pool and make it at least a little bit more cost effective for folks to go out and get their sub license.
So this will kind of help pivot us into what we're looking at for spring session, Alison. But anything else, related to veto session that would seem timely, good for people to hear? Yeah,
so kind of a newish bill. It was not brought up, well, it was filed in the spring session, but wasn't really voted on until this last veto session, but it would require a semester of civics education for middle school. So it did pass the House. It will then go to the Senate, so it could still be considered when they return back and coming in January. But it would require a semester of civics education in either 6th, 7th, or 8th grade. Of course, our opinion is that there's plenty of civics education throughout the Illinois Learning Standards, throughout the social studies standards for middle school. Not really something that we're not addressing currently. It is something we're addressing currently. So we'll hopefully be working with the Senate sponsor to hopefully make some changes or try to alleviate the impact of that bill.
Right. So speaking of that and just looking ahead here to the spring session, Alison, what else do you think that we're going to be keyed in on this spring?
Yeah, probably the biggest thing is the teacher shortage and sub shortage. Obviously, I think everyone out there is aware of the issue, and you're probably having those same issues yourself. So I think that in conjunction with ISB's year of inquiry on the sub shortage, on educator shortage, probably is what they're also looking at, just principal pipeline and all those things. I think the Senate Education Committee has taken an interest in the topic, and they've had a hearing just recently over in Decatur. So I think some of the things that we've talked about here in the office is just looking at reciprocity, diversity in the field, how can we get people in a second career into the field of education, alternative certifications, those types of things, and just how can we also help get more subs in the schools and help our principals stay
not have to be subbing.
Yeah, right.
No, I know. Every time, and every time I go to a meeting anymore and I ask the question, how many of you have substitute a class in the past week or two. Typically, you get half or better of the room has raised their hands for that. I think a couple other things that will be of interest to people of what's been taking place related to the teacher shortage issue. I know that the governor's office got a grant from the National Governors Association, and they finalized and now put out a report related to the educator pipeline, and we're going to make sure to make that available on IPA Connect so people can read it. It is really worthwhile. We might even see if we can get some of those individuals that were a part of that to come on for a future IPA talk as well. Another thing I know that we're going to be interested in taking a look at here possibly this spring, if we can get a sponsor that would take interest in it, a legislator that would take interest in that, is maybe getting a hand, not as near as big of an issue as the teacher shortage, obviously, but maybe getting a handle on all the mandated trainings that we require in the state, because we're now up to what, over 20 or so?
Yeah. There are plenty.
So hopefully we can make it so that it's a little bit more manageable, maybe getting it to where we can have those only be required once every certification cycle or something like that, but hopefully we can come at that. So thanks for that, Allison. Appreciate that. Brian, let's pivot to you and talk a little bit about the legal case law update came out recently from IPA that goes through a whole host of things. What are people going to find when they pick that up? What would be of special interest for them?
Well, this will be our 7th annual legislative and case law update, and we try to put it out every November, kind of when things wrap up for the year, both legislatively and in the courts. And we try to take a look at everything that has happened throughout the year from a building level perspective, and not only let our members know what's in the pipeline, but give them practice tips and implementation tips to make sure that they're meeting the intent of the law.
Right.
So a couple of things that are in there that we've gotten a surprising number of questions about. The first is President Trump's announcement that the DACA program will end, the Deferred Action on Childhood Arrivals. And there are some 800,000 people in the state of Illinois, in the country, that under DACA have deferred actions on deportations and the right to work. And we're not seeing immigration officials come into schools and arrest kids. But there have been a number of cases where kids have come home and parents have been arrested. And we want to make sure that schools support kids, make sure that families know that school's a safe place for them to be, but also provide guidance on what we can do to help kids if something happens with mom and dad. And the legislative and case law update has extensive guidance on that.
Excellent. Very good. From a case law perspective, Brian, what would be of interest to people beyond that? Any cases in particular in the update that people really should make sure that they pay attention to?
There are. The courts are always
they're never out of session, are they?
Into education. Right. And probably the one court case that has received the most attention deals with special education, where the U.S. Supreme Court has said that a child receiving a de minimis education from their IEP is no longer sufficient. And in a case called Andrew F. versus Douglas County School District, the court now said, and I'll read this because I want to make sure the verbiage correctly, that an IEP must be reasonably calculated to ensure that a child makes appropriate educational progress.
So do we have any specifics on what calculated means?
Well, that's a good question. What does that mean? And I think for Illinois, it's less of an issue than for the rest of the country, because in Illinois, we already have a case on the books called the Alex R. case, in which the courts have said that IEPs have to be calculated so the student makes reasonable educational progress. Well, reasonable educational progress sounds a lot to me like reasonably calculated to make progress. So I think in Illinois, we're already meeting the standards set down by the Supreme Court. So I think this case is just a good reminder to make sure that we are looking at each kid individually and making sure that their IEP meets their individual needs.
Perfect. Anything else, Brian, from the update you think is worth of interest to highlight here today, or we want to make sure people get in there and read that?
Well, we want to make sure that people take a look at it. There's a lot of good information in there. but that should be on people's desks around November 15th, and also will be on the IPA website.
Excellent. Very good. And I also think if folks are interested in the evidence-based funding model, we put some information in about that. What I really appreciate about the work that you guys do with that is, as you mentioned earlier, Brian, is really looking at it from the building leader's perspective, because we know there are a whole host of things, legislation, case law issues, that deal with schools in general, but making sure that this focuses on what would be of interest to building principals.
Sure, and we're always happy. I think the three of us are always happy to take member calls and address specific situations.
You bet.
At any time.
Absolutely. So last thing I want to make sure to highlight and remind people about is Principal for a Day, Allison. So we've had a pretty spectacular year thus far with that. You want to talk a little bit about what's happened, and if people are still looking to get involved, what they can do for that?
Definitely. So we've had close to 100 visits statewide this year from state and federal legislators. So it's been a really great year, and I want to thank all the members that have participated this year and been willing to invite their legislators into their schools. I think if you talk to maybe anybody that's participated before, it's a worthwhile experience to at least have some face-to-face time and one-on-one time even with your legislator to kind of explain some of these bills and some of these laws and how they really come into effect in a school and what that really means for kids and for staff. Certainly we focus on doing a lot of those in the month of October during National Principals Month. But, it's a great thing to do year round, inviting legislators to, I know a lot of people invite them to their Veterans Day programs that they just finished up and wrapped up with. But certainly, band concerts and science fairs and all of those things that you want to show off your school for, those are great opportunities to invite your legislators to come to as well. So. And
then a really neat thing is that when we go talk to legislators, they frequently mention that they were at one of their district schools and remember the principal's name and what they did with the kids, and it's a great way for us to have relationships.
Well, I had that very experience here recently. I was at the Capitol for a meeting and bumped into Senator Menard, who we know has been really involved in a variety of school-related issues, including funding. But he just mentioned to me, he said, I was at the elementary school of this district, and I went to another district to the high school. But he said, I heard back from the high school of the district where he had gone to the elementary school, and they were giving him a hard time that he didn't stop by there. So now he's going back to do that. And I do appreciate Senator Menard and the other legislators that have participated as part of that, because I think it's a good experience for community building, for communication, and making sure there's great understanding of what's happening in the Capitol and how it affects, what's going on at the schoolhouse as well.
And I think they enjoy it too, don't they?
I think so too, yeah. I mean, we've had legislators that, go out and they participate in recess, and they're, they're pitching the kickball for kids, or they're serving lunch, or just a variety of different things. And of course, reading to kids and visiting social studies classes and those sort of, regular things. But I think a lot of schools really try to make it special for the folks that they have in as well.
Agreed. Very good. So as far as getting involved with that, Allison, obviously they can reach out to you, email you. I think it's important that people know you equip them with lots of resources, talking points, things that individuals may want to make sure that they bring up with their legislators. But and you've made that pretty user friendly, really, to help facilitate the scheduling of that as well. So I appreciate your leadership with that. So thanks, guys. Looks like maybe we'll do this again about mid-spring session for another update, unless something pops up. We'll make sure we have our plaid shirts ready to go. Brian, that's all good. Again, Alison MALEY, Public Relations Director for IPA, and Brian SCHWARTZ, Deputy Director and General Counsel for IPA. My name is Jason Leahy, Executive Director here at the Association. Thanks again for joining us for this IPA talk, and as always, don't hesitate to give us a call if you need anything. Be sure to click on the buttons here or the links on the screen to subscribe to our YouTube channel, and as well as find other videos here related to IPA talk and association business. Take care.